After e4, e5, knight c3, bishop c5. I've chosen this bishop c5 move as the first Vienna video that I'm going to go through, and well, there's going to be all of them. This is going to be a long journey, and we're going to be mastering the Vienna Gambit. So the next move to play is f4, and this is basically the third move 99% of the times. The only time that f4 is not played is when black plays f5 before, which is a huge blunder. We're going to go through that in the next videos. So now we play f4. Well, let's go through a bunch of different scenarios. Let's start from d6, right? It's a very normal move, and we can start talking about what's wrong, what can go wrong with the black player. Now, knight f3 comes next. The idea, as everyone already knows probably, is to play f4 before knight to f3, simply because then when you castle, the rook will be on an open file. So the rook on the f file will be open after the swap of this pawn, which is already possible. We're not going to do it immediately, but it's possible, and the fact that it's possible is enough. We're just going to be cancelling and get a rook on an open file, which is why white gives up this dangerous, which is not very dangerous, diagonal, and it's sort of a king's gambit scenario, very similar. Black can make a move that is bad already, right, which looks completely normal, like knight c6. This is bad because in this way, well, the black player is now going to have to give up the bishop pair. White has to play knight a4 now. This knight's attacking the bishop and also the retreat square of the bishop, so plenty of things are possible. Let's go on with bishop g4. Black is not like lost or anything, like the game is actually just fine. It's equal, but we know the pattern we're about to create. So now we take the bishop. No reason to waste time. It's better to take the bishop here, so let's remember this, right? As I've mentioned so many times in my videos, we're not here to memorize moves because that doesn't make sense. We're here to understand the patterns. The bishop taken in b6 is not as good. We're still going to take it, right? But then they take back and they have a rook on an open file. So let's use our brain and understand that this moment is much better, because after take, the rook is not developed, right? So that is a slight advantage for the white player. Yes, the queen is developed, but that doesn't do much. And you will see why in the next moves. So now it's white to move again. And we simply play d3. We don't have to worry about the development of the light squared bishop. Also, d3 is here because we need to immediately protect the pawn in f4, so that if they take, we can take back. And the idea is that with this type of structure, after pawn takes f4, black might try to play something like g5, h6, and create a chain of pawns that if black plays very, very well, it might be able to consolidate, and then we don't win our pawn back. So d3 now is the best move. Now let's also mention something else. The bishop will have to take the knight. That is not only the best move considered by the engine, but also it makes sense. If you think about it, you have so many winning of tempos here. h3, if the bishop goes back to h5, we have the typical pattern, you know, you've all seen this before. The bishop is trapped, and the bishop will have to go back somewhere on the diagonal, on the same diagonal where he came from, which means it didn't make any sense that he pinned us. And also on top of that, we have two attackers on e5. We're going to be winning material and conquering the center completely. So after d3, bishop takes, we take back with the queen. There's no reason not to develop a piece. G takes f would have been really stupid because of queen h4. So now black will have to castle. So to castle kingside, he can play knight f6 or knight g to e7. Okay, let's have a look at knight f6 first. After knight f6, we take the pawn, and now black has to take back with the knight. And we play queen to g3, which is forking these two. So how does black defend it? Let's go through different ways to defend it. Knight g6, which kind of saves the two of them at the same time, is met by bishop to e2. The idea, the bishop is attacking h5, white will castle alongside, the bishop will reach g5, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on f6. So how does black stop it? If black castles, we don't waste time, we go on with h4. And this is going to be a very strong attack. And white's got the two bishops and a very threatening queen and a rook, whereas black will have to play defensive for a while. A move like h4 it's a pattern to remember. It's punished immediately by bishop to g5. The bishop can take the pawn in h5. This pawn will fall, and then the h5 pawn will move. And yeah, you can figure out from here how to continue. This is already a solid advantage. Let's look at another move to defend all of this. After h4, best move by black according to the engine is queen to d6, and we do have to take. Black takes back, and now black's position is compromised. The attack was much better for white. The advantage is about like a piece according to the engine, and this pawn in d6 is a weak pawn. It's going to be stuck there forever. We have the bishop pair. Our next move is h5. Black will have to move the knight. None of these squares are possible, so he's going to have to choose this one, e5. Well, also e7, that's possible. Well, after e5, which seems to be making some sense, in h6, white will just try to open this file for the rook. And after developing the bishop, maybe to f4 or g5, it depends on how black plays, and castling alongside, white can also start to think of launching this pawn. Now, of course, all of these moves that I'm mentioning just depend on how black plays, but these are the ideas of how it would go on. Our idea, after h6, our idea is to take the pawn. Then bishop g5, attacking f6. The king will not be able to move the rook. So, for example, pawn takes and rook moves. Then our best move is bishop g5. Right, this is looking amazing for white. And if instead, well, the king takes, for example, we go bishop h6. So there's a lot of threats. So after h6, let's have a look at this idea, g6. The queens are not on the board, so black doesn't really have to worry about checkmates in g7, for example. White goes on with castle. So the idea of why we play this move is not only because it attacks the knight, because it develops the rook to a good square. The rook in h1 would have been fine if this pawn were to disappear, but unfortunately, black played the right move, the best move in the position, and now the rook has no future from this file. So now we go here, we attack the knight. A move like knight g4 is a waste of move because the knight isn't threatening anything. It's not threatening the pawn in h6, which is protected. Black can try to remaneuver the knight from d7. So in order to consolidate the advantage, what we need to do is paralyze the opponent pieces, and this will be done by c3. Right, so that's our move. The future goal of c3, as we all know in the e4, e5 games, the typical thing, pawn to d4 eventually after maybe take or even without take, we still have pawns in d4. We're going to have 2 pawns in the center. After c3, I'm just going to stop the line there because there's so many other lines to show, and this one is the advantage is now calculated something like a piece. So we've got the bishop pair, very advanced pawn, rook on an open file, and especially the most important thing, what we need to concentrate on is going to be this backwards pawn in d6. We're going to target it in the future. To make this knight more useless, since the knight is planning maybe to go to b6, or even black might think of playing b5, the following move, our plan would be something like a4 and then bishop to f4, putting more pressure on this pawn and threatening d4 that wins, right? Of course, we don't play many moves in a row, but that's the plan. And also, there's nothing to worry about a move like c4. We will just play d4 as we wanted to anyway. And after knight to d3, one might be tempted to take the knight and then pawn takes back and then target the pawn, which is isolated. And we will, well, I haven't really bothered calculating this or going through an engine line or something. I'm pretty sure we can take the pawn in d3 eventually, but we're not going to give up the bishop pair. And also we have this move now, bishop g5, a pattern to remember. We're going to have to focus on this pawn, and the idea is to play bishop e7, forking the two of them. Well, that's just an idea. If black tries to stop it with rook to e8, for example, attacking the pawn in e4, we played b3. And we try to remove the defense for this knight. So if the pawn were to take, we'd have a free knight. This can be stopped maybe with b5 or d5. Let's try b5. We still take the pawn. Pawn takes back. And now we play bishop to g4, attacking the knight. The knight will have to move. Where? None of these squares is accessible, so after knight to b6, we play the usual a4. The idea is to advance the pawn, and then we're going to play rook f to b1. We're going to put the rooks on the 7th rank, depending on how it goes. If black is really stubborn, he would play a5. Then again, we just go on with the plan. The rook goes on to attack the knight. I'm aware we've gone way past theory here. I'm just giving you an insight of how the endgame would look like and all the potential ideas. What matters is that you grasp the 4 or 5 most compromising mistakes of the black player in this specific line, and then you work out your own moves. This endgame that I'm going through right now is just an example of all the millions of endgames that are possible. After rook f to b1, we attack the knight. If knight is defended from b8, for example, we just play rook b5, and nothing stops us from winning a crucial pawn and developing a passed pawn. And advantage here is considered like about 2 pieces by the engine, so feel free to feel very comfortable here. If the knight is protected with the rook from a6, we play bishop to f3, protecting the pawn, and we still threaten rook to b5, and then pawn up to e5, completely winning move, threatening bishop b7. None of this is actually stoppable. We've got a bishop pair from hell. So going back a few moves, let's quickly mention, well, earlier we went through b5, protecting the pawn. Let's quickly mention the kind of ideas we play after pawn to d5. Here it's very similar. We play bishop to g4, attacking the knight, and after the knight moves, let's say to b7, similar to before, we play e5 and we completely paralyze the opponent. Look at these 2 bishops. How amazing it is to play an endgame like this. And this knight is there to stay. He has no access anywhere. Also, well, from b2, but he will be trapped next. And he's got no access from this side either. So we're going to enjoy the position here. A stronger move now. If we were to play again, we will play a4. This is a stronger move. Because this move, this is a pattern to remember. This move here makes this knight bad. If the black player plays a5, for example, to stop the advance of the pawn, we can take the pawn and we're attacking the knight. And if the knight takes the pawn, then we're taking the pawn in b7 with the rook. If black doesn't play a move like that, then nothing's going to stop us from taking the pawn and go to the 7th rank.